Okay, welcome back from the break. So hope you enjoyed it. And then he come to our next segment, talk about the financial service and APIs. So in this section, we will be introduced quite some topic, talk about the essential technologies on open banking. So first of all, so we will have AJ from ForgeRock, who is the regional vice president, and he will be talking about the digital identity centric approach to accelerate the Hong Kong MA OpenAPI Phase 3 and 4 compliance, which is very important questions. So, okay, how are you, AJ?
I'm doing well. Hi, Patrick. Good morning. How are you?
Yeah, fine. And then your voice is good. And then yeah, I can also see your slide here. So yep. So is it the first time that you are okay? Yeah. Okay. So I think this is good now. So maybe I will let you to talk about your content. Okay. See you soon.
Sure thing. Thanks, Patrick. Good morning, everyone. And we are thrilled and excited to have you here for me to share my thoughts, our learnings, around digital identity-centric approach for HKMA OpenAPI compliance for phase 3 and 4. Now, obviously, HKMA has embarked this journey since 2017, where it's sort of encouraging the banks in Hong Kong to essentially start participating in the OpenAPI initiatives and start sharing and cross-sharing and leveraging information with other banks and third-party service providers. Phase 1 and 2 were essentially, around just getting things going. But I think phase 3 and 4 are very critical and also will provide a lot more offerings for the market as we go along and for the consumers' benefit. So I'm going to share about our thought process and our learnings based on the work we have done in Australia, CDR, and Hong Kong, UK open banking, and a couple of banks who have already adopted, our platform for supporting phase 3 and phase 4 initiatives. So without further ado, let me get going with the content. As you can see, obviously the Open API initiatives is pretty much 3 years old now. People have adopted it. There were like phase 1 and phase 2, where it was more about sharing product information without pretty much authentication in place, and anybody can come and pull up information from the participating banks and financial organizations. Phase 2 essentially became where customer acquisition means new applications were onboarded through open API initiatives by third-party service providers as well as by banks. But I think phase 3 and 4 are very, very critical and will essentially dictate the success of these initiatives, as well as bring in a lot more new features, functionalities, and offerings for the end customers, as well as provide new platform for third-party service providers. But obviously, they are more complex. They require much more control, and hence there is much more deeper integration and effort required by the banks, by the third-party service providers, as well as a lot of more factors needs to be considered while designing and implementing phase 3 and phase 4. Now, what's good is that Hong Kong Monetary Authority has essentially made it like a progressive approach. So you don't need to roll out everything in one go on one particular date. You can do it progressively, starting from December 2021. But we believe there is a huge opportunity space for the banks to transform themselves and leverage this as an opportunity. And recently there was a research conducted by HKMA and Accenture, and a report was published around the next phase in banking open APIs in Hong Kong. And there's a lot more data points from there which we can leverage and give us the guidance how open API is going to change the landscape and provide opportunities while managing some of the risks and challenges. A couple of very interesting data points from that report around the opportunity space is there are about 7% banks who have already launched phase 3 and phase 4 kind of open API use cases. And these are probably the new virtual banks which have gone live in last 1.5 year, but they have already built systems from day one to support phase 3 and phase 4 kind of initiatives. And you can see examples at Mox Bank where there's a lot of third-party integration already taking place to avoid later on struggling with opening up new use cases, etc. They have taken that as a baseline and already launched a lot of services, and they are essentially garnering a lot of new customer base. Latest what I heard from Mox Bank was they have about 135,000 new customers already onboarded and taking advantage of these initiatives. Obviously, the official timeline to start rolling out 3 and 4, phase 3 and 4 is around December 2021. So there's a lot of banks who are still thinking about it and developing the solution, right? In terms of the use cases that in the retail space, especially they are looking at is around account information aggregation, as well as transaction initiation services. This is pretty much more than 50% of the participants sort of highlighted that these are the main use cases they're going to implement in phase 3 and 4. If we look at the chart on the right hand side, figure 14, which from the report talks about what are the main usage of the open banking APIs according to the banks and TSPs. The two more important ones that we have seen in discussions and shared as around new revenue streams and new product services, as well as customer satisfaction and retentions because of the competition in the market already. And again, people are leveraging, the banks and the TSPs are leveraging open APIs as a way of differentiating themselves, providing better experience, personalized experience, as well as crafting and drafting new revenue streams as they go along. But obviously, as you go and embark on this, open API journey in phase 3 and phase 4, there are obviously some major challenges that all the participants have already identified. The top three being the challenge around fraud and cybersecurity risks, because there's a lot more personal information will be exposed through open APIs. The difficulty in identifying the use cases and the tangible business benefits, because for the new banks, especially the virtual ones, it's sort of new open API use cases, new use cases that they're going to go with the market with and affiliate with third parties, right? But the existing banks, well-established banks in the Hong Kong, still are figuring out what are the tangible benefits of this. Obviously, we can draw a leaf from UK open banking here, where the success story around HSBC, who essentially leveraged open banking as a way of transforming itself, but also essentially participating as a third party itself. So that they are not just participating in sharing information, but they're also cross-leveraging information from other banks. So a very good business case and benefit around open APIs, you become the part of the ecosystem rather than just providing the data in it. The third most important challenge that the participants highlighted was around the complexity of technical development work, including legacy modernization. And again, this primarily applies to most of the existing banks, which have got legacy infrastructure, legacy application, and the way of integration in place. And obviously, this is a challenge that they have to overcome while opening up information as part of phase 3 and phase 4. Now, it's very, very critical and important in our opinion, and I'm going to share more about that particular topic as we go along in the presentation. From a key risks perspective, right, while you're adopting this phase 3 and phase 4, opening up account information, sharing more with the ecosystem, there's obviously more risks associated. The biggest point that the most of the participants highlighted was around cybersecurity risk, because you're going to share more personal identifiable information with the market. You're going to share it with the third parties. So associated protections around authentication, authorization, and federation is very, very important, and basically is expanding your threat surface area from an attack vector perspective. System resilience risk, essentially, as the scale will increase, more third-party service provider will participate and would want to build offerings. There will be more load digitally coming through these open API on the bank's core systems. And as I said, a lot of it is legacy. So how do you scale up and make sure that transaction throughput requirements are met, as the load will increase as you open up APIs and participate in the ecosystem? Obviously, as you're sharing customer information, the privacy of that information and the consent management becomes very crucial. And we have seen that in open banking in UK, in CDR, consent management and data privacy were the key tenets when this whole guidelines was defined. And it's a very, very crucial piece for the success. Just imagine if a third party or a bank opens their information and the data gets leaked or they get breached, right? It will be a big shock and impact to their credibility as well as to the overall program. So data privacy and consent are very, very important and crucial for the success of the initiative. Obviously, there are liability risks, right? Because now you're allowing third parties to essentially access information, obviously taking customers' consent, but at the same time, if they store information in any shape or form, they might be liable to share your information, and that brings risk to the existing banks as they're opening up the APIs. And lastly, it's around fraud and money laundering risk, because there will be transactional information, there will be transactions done as part of these open API phase 3 and phase 4, where there could be a case where the transaction done by the third party could lead into scenarios where the money laundering is taking place, right? So how to avoid these things, how to control these things? We believe all these elements have a very strong connect with the digital identity of your end customers and the digital identity of the third party service providers in this case. Those are the main key risks identified. Now, obviously, you have to mitigate those risks, right? So we essentially looked at the overall guidelines provided by HKMA and the research conducted by Accenture. And what we believe is there are 4 major areas where the key requirements from protection standpoint will come to mitigate all these risks that we have seen in the first slide. One is around data protection and retention. Obviously, very simple. When we are sharing the information by the means of these API, how are we protecting the end-to-end data transactionally, as well as how are we essentially managing the protection and the retention of the data with the third parties and making sure that they use it for the purpose consented by the end user and not for anything else, and obviously have a retention period predefined and the associated protection mechanism at place on the third party side as well as on the bank side. Customer consent, absolutely crucial and very, very important. And in fact, if I read the guidelines carefully, customer consent has been repeated multiple times and essentially goes to an extent the customer needs to have a visibility of what data is getting shared when they are giving the consent, what is the purpose of the usage of that data. And at the same time, they should have the access to go back, review historically what consent was given, and probably at some point, if they feel they need to revoke the consent, have that ability to revoke back the consent. Now, that sounds very complex, but it is very, very important and has been successfully implemented in other open banking initiatives in UK and Australia under the CDR, and is the key tenet to success of open API and the ecosystem that we're trying to build under these initiatives. Fraud detection and prevention goes without saying. If you're transacting, you're sharing third-party information, propagating between the third party, the bank, and the customer, the detection of the fraud, whether the user is genuinely user who's trying to come and transact, identifying the fraud risk, identifying the various parameters, following zero trust and carton model goes without saying, right? Continuous authorization is the key here. You got to continuously look at what's going on and not just in the piecemeal and authentication and authorization perspective, and prevent them to avoid any kind of fraud by continuously looking at the context of the transaction. Disclosure and transparency, again, is very simple and self-explanatory. They need to disclose what data is being collected, for what purpose, and essentially maintain that transparency with the end customer and the banks to avoid any kind of risk associated with these data points. Now the question comes, right? And one of the risks and one of the fears that the participants had is, how are they going to go about modernizing? How are they going to go about developing these open API based initiatives as part of phase 3 and 4? So obviously they have two choices: build themselves, code it, manage it, or buy a solution to essentially support these open API based initiatives. The question is very simple, and time and again we have seen customers falling into the same sort of category, whether to build or buy. What we can come to what we can contribute based on our experience with 150 banks and financial institutions globally, and the scale that we have seen and the implementation that we have done for 3 billion identities, is that obviously if you try and build it, you have to worry about the scale in the future, because maybe you will start with 100,000 users at one point. What if that transactional level goes up to millions of users in the near future as the ecosystem grows? How about the performance and experience? What you don't want is, as a third-party service provider or as a bank, you start offering something and that is not able to scale and provide the experience that the customer wants, and then the adoption gets impacted, right? So very, very important pain if you try to build it versus if you buy a solution which is already proven from a scale and experience perspective. Security, obviously it's embedded, right? You got to take care of the security, privacy, and consent of the end user, and you need to have the ability out of the box to support the consent receipts, historical consent provided, etc. When the customer wants to come in a self-service way, want to see what consent they have given, revoke it if they want to, or extend it if they want to, right? All those elements, if you try to code and build yourself, can take a lot of time, energy, and effort, obviously, which becomes expensive in a way, while managing the cost is one of the key tenets also while adopting open APIs, but also leads to a lot of security problems. And we have seen this time and again with well-established banks, with large scales, with other projects that we have done globally. Security becomes compromised if you try and build everything yourself, right? So buying is a better option in that case, because you're following standards in that case, you're following a proven model rather than trying to build it themselves. Very, very important side of the equation is how you're going to deploy it and run it. You need microservices-based architecture, support for DevOps, etc. So building it all the way means a lot of work while you're trying to modernize your legacy infrastructure. So there are various points to consider when you're deciding between build versus buy. Some of them are tactical, but most of them are strategic. And hence, this is a very good opportunity for the banks to looking at solutions rather than building it themselves. Most cost-effective as well as secure, providing the experience and time to market that they want. And not to forget, open banking, if you see on the extreme left on this diagram, is probably one of the channels which is coming to play, right? But there are many other channels the banks are already supporting or have to support. Going forward, there will be many more channels coming in. So this is a good time for the banks to start looking for an omni-channel, a personalized experience platform, which can help them integrate all their channels while treating the open APIs as one of the channels to support the adoption, while maintaining the security, privacy, and the consent associated with it. And also, leverage the data that they're collecting, the behavioral experience that they're collecting from the end user, and use it to more personalized experience for the end customers, rather than looking at an open API based initiative only. This is a very big opportunity for well-established banks in Hong Kong to start, transforming themselves and use an omni-channel platform from a personalized experience perspective for the end customer. So a big opportunity as well as the adoption of open API, open banking and open API is provided to them. What are we doing as a provider in the market? And as I said, we have lots of experience in UK open banking, Australian CDR. Tons of our customers essentially have embarked on their journey with ForgeRock, primarily driven by open banking initiatives. And as I showed in the previous slide, now they're leveraging it across channels, across applications to better serve their end customers. In a nutshell, if I were to summarize in one slide, all the way from your authentication and federation needs, integrating with your third-party service providers as a bank, or third-party service provider integrating with the banks, providing strong authentication, we provide that out of the box. A lot of times, as the transactions will go through, authorization is needed, things like step-up and transaction authorization, integrating with multi-factor authentication provider of your own choice, as well as using it from the platform that we provide. The heart remains the OIDC and OAuth 2 part of the equation, because that's the key standard being used when you're integrating with APIs and leveraging access tokens, etc. So OAuth 2 service provider and identity provider interfaces are equally important, while you onboard third parties using dynamic client registration, as well as give the ability for the third parties to allow them to introspect tokens by calling your APIs as part of this platform. We are essentially FAPI certified, which is financial grade API certification, and essentially is one of the key flows in the OAuth 2 profiles these days, supporting open banking and SIVA flows, as well as the security around OAuth 2 tokens, because it's not just minting a token and giving it to the third party and they're able to serve their end customers. What you got to also do is continuously look at the context, following the zero trust principle, make sure that the context is checked in every call, every transaction, instead of blindly trusting it based on just an access token. So things like proof of possession, PKC are very, very critical element. And in fact, we have seen in UK open banking and in Australian CDR, these are now becoming standards. So I'm very sure this will become the standard for HKMA OpenAPI initiatives. Lastly, consent services are very key part. As I said, it's heavily sort of leveraged upon by a lot of other banking initiatives, open banking initiatives. So the ability to have a consent service, remote consent service, and the ability to look at the token and the customization of the token is a key element when customers talk to us and adopt our platform for open banking. So very, very important. And from a compliance standpoint, this is where we scale significantly higher to help our customers out of the box integrate with the open API requirements and compliance, rather than trying to build it themselves and get ready in the matter of minutes, rather than doing over weeks, months, in some cases years. If I go in a little bit more depth, you can see there are a lot more offerings from our side when we go in depth of the platform components. From an identity management perspective, managing the relationship between the bank, third party, and the customer, and the associated consent provider, all the way to the left, where you provide the customer with an interface, provide the consent, choose what they want to share, and basically uncheck what they do not want to share, while maintaining the consent receipt and the history. If the customer wants to come back and check the historical way of how they have consented, and essentially if they want to revoke, right? All this in a nutshell is provided in the form of accelerated toolkits from our side, out of the box features and functionality. But we don't stop there, right? As I said, open API is probably one of the channels that the banks or the third-party service providers are going to leverage on. But the platform essentially is AI-driven and does much more than that. In fact, any and every use case when it comes to identity and access management for your consumers, your internal identities, employees, workforce, as well as devices and things, is supported by the platform. And one of the key features around there is the ability to draw those customer journeys, map them with what you want to launch, because one of the key problems that the participants in the survey said was they do not know what are the tangible benefits, how they're going to go about and define those customer journeys for the customers to adopt while maintaining the experience. So that's where we come into play and help our customers define those journeys, adopt the right model, and essentially drag and drop using our intelligent access functionality in our platform, which allows them to drag and draw these opportunity space while defining various steps in the journey the customer will take, maintaining the security, privacy, and associated consent management needs. With the help of our trust network integration, which is quite expanded now, more than 80 pre-registered and out-of-the-box integrations. So whether you're embarking on a journey where you need to do a multi-factor authentication with a strong authentication provider, or you want to integrate with a risk, provider like ThreatMetrix, LexisNexis, or you would like to check with a blacklisted database to see whether the transaction that's going on is faulty, or is there any kind of fraud associated with this IP address, or is this part of a bot attack, right? You can do all that out of the box with the help of our intelligent access and trust network, which is part of the same platform. Lastly, quickly about the company, we've been in the market for over 10 years now, closing in 11 years. The market space is big. We are catering to a lot of enterprise customers, scale anywhere between few thousand identities all the way of 100 million identities or more, and growing at a very, very fast pace while helping our customers, drive customer benefits as well as derive value for their shareholders while providing the security consent in the best possible fashion, right? That's what I wanted to present today. Happy to take any questions.
Hey for sharing. Yeah, hello. So thanks for sharing. So he come to some question. So it's mainly from the local audience, I think. So you share a lot of how your company and platform address the identity problem maybe in different region. So to be more specific, so Hong Kong now is in the phase 3 and 4. So quite some banks need to actually urge for the timeline next year in maybe March or June for the phase 3. So we can also see that the goal or the baseline is still actually under draft on finalized at this moment. So do you have any quick suggestions? So because I think quite some member from the community say, okay, they are still figuring out how much to invest at this moment for the use cases. And then should they go for a full-blown product, or do you have any suggestion from your perspective talk about the buy and build thing? Yeah.
So one of the suggestions, as I said, right, time to market and the security and consent will be the most important pieces here, right? If you try to build it, maybe you will solve a technical problem today, but just imagine if you scale to millions of users, millions of transactions every day, every minute, how are you going to be able to scale and be able to manage that level of security and consent requirements, right? So the recommendation from our side is to start using platforms, right? And I think this is what some of the virtual banks have smartly done already in Hong Kong. And hence they are already phase 3 and 4 compliant because they invested into a CIM platform like ForgeRock. They're ready to go. They're already compliant phase 3 and phase 4, while the other banks are trying to, figure out how to do it, what to do it. A key reason why build is difficult is also because of the legacy, right? Because you've got so many legacy systems which are not ready, which are not microservices and API driven. And that's where the platform and the accelerators that we provide help the customers, especially the banks, enable API exposure or microservices based exposure of these legacy systems. So if you try and transform, convert them into API based system, it will take a long time. Whereas if you use a platform which is out of the box supporting these functionalities and enabling your legacy system to be modernized in the form of API services, it's much faster. And trust me, it is very, very cost effective also, because if you try to build it and code it, the cost becomes very expensive in the long run. So immediate little bit of investment in the platform is the advice we would give. And we have already have proof point in the market. Those 7-8% are actually the virtual banks who adopted a platform rather than trying to build it themselves.
So talking about the maybe the compliance requirements, so it's quite country specific. So there's another audience is asking, so how the country specific requirement being addressed, especially for the consents, for example, in Europe, the GDPR, in Hong Kong, talking about BDPO, etc. So how the country specific requirement being addressed?
Yes, a very good question.
Platform.
Yeah, very good question. Every country has a different variant, right? So open banking is, as I said, is probably one of the channels, for the banks if they treat it like that. And in our experience, that's the way the bigger banks have seen it, right? HSBC, Standard Chartered have seen that as a channel, right, rather than the solution required. What has also happened is things like GDPR, PDPA in Singapore, and CDR in Australia have also put a lot of responsibility and compliance requirement on the banks while they are opening up their APIs, while they are providing, because it's ultimately the customer data, right? So in my opinion, GDPR is the most comprehensive, sort of requirements. Others are essentially just taking it a little bit or here and there. And our platform supports GDPR, a lot of requirements out of the box. So we have been able to help with the same platform in UK, in US, in California, based on the individual PDPA laws or GDPR laws, alongside the open banking API initiatives, right? So it has been a very good ride for us. A lot of learning. We built a lot of capabilities like POPs and PKCE based, solution out of the box. From a security standpoint, remote consent service is another one which has helped our customers adhere to GDPR, PSD2, and PDPA related requirement aside from the open banking and open API related initiatives, right? So we are confident of doing it. We have done it in the past. I'm happy to take the conversation further. I know we are stretched for time here. But again, I'm happy to provide more details in one-on-one conversations. They can reach out to me on and scan my QR code via LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to take those questions.
Honestly, we still got quite some questions, but time is running out. So for those people who are interested in this area, feel free to reach out AJ offline. And then I think data and consent is really the huge topic. Talk about phase 3 and phase 4 is really challenging. So thanks again for AJ's support. So see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick.